Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is 3:02. This is a meeting from the City of Indio, October 6th. It is of the City Council. It is a study session, and I'm calling the meeting to order at 3:02. And may I have roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor. For the record, all members of the council are present.
Thank you. Okay. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Place your hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Okay, public comment. This is the time set aside for public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have any public comments? Miss City Clerk?
I have no comments at the moment, Mayor.
Okay, then we'll move on to item number 4, study session item, City Council study session for discussion and possible direction on the following short-term rental ordinance. Miss Diaz, and I understand Jason Anderson is also on Zoom.
Yes, thank you so much. And if we can queue up the PowerPoint, which I see it's queued up to, yep, that's it. Great. Thank you very much. We're just going to pick up, I think, kind of where we left off, but maybe a little bit different
Okay.
in the sense that I went back through everyone's comments and wanted to present to you kind of the main discussion points. And I know that Councilmember Amit also had some items that she wanted to discuss as well. And so they're not listed on the PowerPoint, but I have my notes here and we can go through those as well.
Thank you.
Certainly, I think maybe probably just in the interest of time, I think the main points about parking, occupancy, and noise will take a majority of the time. And then perhaps, and I'll make sure that we leave some time to go through some of the ancillary issues that any of you may have now that you've had a chance to go through the ordinance again and ask any questions.
Terrific. Thank you.
If that works, then I'll go ahead and start. Okay. Oh, no, this is not on page 16. Sorry about that. What I did is I just took our last PowerPoint and then just added some new slides. So there we go. And those are the slides that you have in front of you and that are on the screens. Okay, so noise and amplified sound. On this topic here, what we are recommending are 2 different types of restrictions, both based with respect to noise. The first is on amplified sound. So that would be, your karaoke machine, your cell phone, your radio, et cetera. And that there's no outside amplified sound between 9 p.m. to 8 a.m., Sunday through Thursday, and 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. Friday and Saturday. And that would be outside amplified noise. With respect to inside amplified noise, it would be consistent for the most part with what we do currently, which is it can't be heard beyond the property line at any time. And then the second restriction is a restriction on outside amenities that create noise, such as your pool, or if you have, if you're having, a swimming pool, a spa, games, cornhole, those types of things that perhaps the rental has. And so in that regard, occupants are prohibited from using those outside amenities or engaging in these types of outside activities between 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. Sunday through Thursday and 10 p.m. through 8 a.m. Friday and Saturday. I made the timeframes consistent. I also wanted to show you as well what our current noise ordinance provides. And it says, and this is verbatim, it's unlawful for any person to make, continue, or cause to be made within the city limits or within 200 feet thereof, any disturbing, excessive, or offensive noise or vibration that causes discomfort or annoyance to any reasonable person of normal sensitivity in the area, or that is plainly audible at a distance greater than 50 feet from the source point for any purpose. So if that's an inside noise or an outside noise, it can't be audible 50 feet past whatever that point of noise is. So I wanted to at least give you a framework with respect to how it differs from our current noise ordinance. I'm going to just go trying to go back, but it doesn't.
So this would supersede that ordinance.
No, this would still stay in effect, but for short-term rentals, we do have different standards. And part of it is, do you see why I can't go back on this subject? And the reason why is, you know, it's even though it's a residential use, it's still a use that's that's different than, you know, you owning your home and you having a party outside. And so, you know, we can have different standards than, you know, the house next door that's inhabited by the owner and who lives there, you know, 365 days out of the year. Okay, so I'm gonna have to go back to this. Okay, so just give me a minute. Sorry about that. Okay, what happened here? I'm having technical difficulties, but I'm going to let Sapti figure it out for me since you have the PowerPoint in front of you. And so also wanted to, you know, and I did a quick survey of what the other cities have, because, you know, what I heard at the meeting the last time is, I think all of you understood the noise issue, but at the same time, you wanted to make sure that either one, fairness between a current homeowner and the STR, but also wanted to make sure that we're not at a place where we're being over the top with respect to the STR. So for example, in La Quinta, they do have the provision with respect to radio out, you know, with loudspeakers, et cetera, that they can't be used outside or audible from outside of the STR unit between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. With respect to the other cities that I quickly looked at, Palm Springs, Palm Desert, Rancho Mirage, they all had variations of you cannot engage in any unreasonable noise or disturbances, and you have to comply with the municipal code. The provision that certainly is different is the one with respect to outside amenities and outside activities. So that's something new. And so I just wanted to point that out to you. And so I'm happy to answer questions or, you know, facilitate any kind of discussion.
And so I may be getting ahead of myself. So this sounds great, but my question is, how do we enforce that?
And I know Jason's on the line as well, and I'll jump in too. You know, part of this is that we're setting up regulations and standards. And so it's from the beginning. And, you know, our intent, and frankly, a little bit of hope and luck, is that everybody complies. And what we want to be able to do is set up these standards so that if it becomes excessive, then we can have those discussions with the owner, because that's really ultimately who it's going to fall, you know, to. And even though, again, with noise, just like we do now, and I think Councilmember Miller pointed it out, we need to observe it. And so that means that we go out to the property or the neighbor's property and hear it, and we know that it's excessive. You know, certainly in areas where there's an abundance of STRs, probably no one's ever going to complain. I mean, because you're surrounded by STRs. But again, it's setting a standard that we think is clear, that has, you know, that we know we can understand 9 p.m. to 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. We can understand no use of the pool after 10 p.m. so that if it becomes an issue and we have to revoke somebody's permit, then at least we can document that to the best of our ability. So, you know, with all of these provisions, enforcement is always an issue, but at least there are some standards that are clear that can be utilized. And I think in fairness too, because we also had a discussion about what about the person who doesn't like their neighbor and is consistently calling. Again, I think when a code enforcement officer goes out there, and Jason can answer this, is we're looking at the totality of it all. And especially with respect to renewal, we did build into the ordinance a provision with respect to noise monitors. We have the VRBOs of the world and the Airbnbs have been reaching out to Jason, wanting to comment on the ordinance. And we're going to kind of look at those and bring that back to you again, because I don't think this conversation necessarily ends today. But one of them did suggest that they have noise monitors, and that's one way to do it. But instead of requiring that at the upfront, but we can if you'd like, we're requiring it if it's needed. Because what we're trying to do is focus on the bad actors and not penalize the ones that are, complying with everything. You never hear about them. And so, they don't need that extra cost for the noise monitor. Should be the guy or the gal who has issues. Jason, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, hi, sorry, Roxanne. Madam Mayor, council members, Jason Anderson, Code Enforcement Manager, and I'm sorry I'm on Zoom today, but we'll get through it. That summarized it great. Obviously, any type of enforcement has to be witnessed by an officer, but enforcement is sort of the last thing we want to do. We want to prevent problems from occurring before they start. And some of the provisions as far as like signage and having renters sort of agree to the terms of the rental up front, we hope that will prevent the problems from occurring before they actually do.
So I guess what I'm looking for you is some direction, some consensus. Does that work? Doesn't work? Do you still see issues?
Specific to the amplified sound piece.
Specifically
Okay, I
to
thought we
the
were going
issue of
through.
noise.
Well, let me throw it out to my fellow council members. Any comments?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. For the most part, when you have certain properties, there's going to be folks who, like you use the term bad actors. You have an idea of your problem houses, but at the same time, from what I experienced, a lot of these properties are out and about, or they're large properties. So if it's 10 p.m. and the kids are having a pool party in the summertime, right? It's Sunday through Thursday. Nobody's complaining, nobody's being bothered. I mean, there's no problem, but we have to set the standard so we have a precedence, right, just in case. And I think the times are reasonable. And I haven't heard too much discussion or hard times with folks. I think people comply for the most part because they understand if they don't, there's a penalty, or these policies could get a little bit more stricter. I think these are pretty good.
Okay, anybody else?
I like it as is. Thanks.
I don't have a problem with this. It's just I hate doing rules and regulations that are unenforceable. That's where I go with this, like the pool and creating an amenity that they can't use after a certain period of time, knowing that nobody's actually going to follow it and they're going to do it. That's where they kind of lose me on some of this stuff because it's unenforceable. You're out here, you're taking a vacation. It doesn't have to be a event for Coachella Fest or Stagecoach. It could just be somebody out here and you're telling somebody they can't use the pool that they rented a house for at 10 o'clock at night. And I understand part of it because you want the bad actors, but to really say you can't use as many after a certain period of time, no matter what, doesn't really, I think, is very unenforceable at any time. So I just hate making laws that are unable to be enforced.
Well, let me ask Councilmember Amit.
Sure.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm not sure how we enforce that second one either. I guess I don't follow why we need to restrict the use of outside amenities.
Unless there is noise.
Unless there's noise, right. And what if we have just a silent group sitting in the jacuzzi after 10 p.m.? That's not outside noise. So I'm a little unsure why we're prohibiting it if it's not causing a problem.
And maybe I can address that. So the way that it's written is to address it, I guess, with noise. So it's occupants shall be prohibited from using all outdoor amenities or engaging in outdoor games or activities that create noise between the hours of 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. So it's not a.
Well, that's missing from the PowerPoint presentation.
It makes it sound like it's.
I apologize for that. That wasn't the intent. It was for not engaging in those activities that create noise. And I can tighten this up a little bit more because I certainly understand that, you have a group that's in the jacuzzi or in the pool and there's noise that doesn't cross the property line and it's not being excessive,
right,
and you can't hear it, then yes, they should be able to use the pool. But if they're, having, I don't know, playing games, having an adult beverage and playing cornhole at 11 o'clock at night, and you could hear it, and that's different.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
And I might chime in, Mayor. I think the practicality of it, something the Mayor Pro Tem indicated. So if we don't hear about that cornhole game at 11 o'clock and it's a little bit noisy, it's not bothering the neighbors, they're asleep or they're playing too, we'll never know. But when it is a problem, then we can go and point to a specific code provision and say, see, you can't do this. So I think it's helpful to have in there, even though we're not going to go out there looking for it. It's only going to be if we receive a complaint. And the only way we have leverage when we receive a complaint is if we have a code provision to rely upon.
Exactly, and I would agree with that. Hopefully, this is just even a non-starter, because 90% or more of the folks that are out there doing short-term rentals are enjoying their time off in a manner that doesn't, impinge on someone else's privacy, whether that's noise or any other way. I think we're looking at this from the perspective of that small percentage. I mean, it may even be 2 or 3% of people that really create some of the major issues out there that up until now, we've had a hard time enforcing, particularly on the weekends. That's how I see it. I don't want it too tight. I don't want to strangle anybody. I don't want to make it such that, nobody wants to come, but we just need to make it a little bit more friendly for the existing residents and put some teeth into something that is enforceable when once in a while the larger problems occur.
I concur. I think the way it's worded,
Yeah.
the way it makes it sound is that it needs to be that if the outdoor amenity creates a noise issue, then it becomes that during a certain period of time.
Yeah.
But it's really redundant, because if they're making a noise at 8 o'clock, you're going to come see them anyway.
Exactly,
So
right.
the way it makes it sound, because you've already said 8 o'clock, now all of a sudden you're saying to prohibit amenities at that time, makes it sound like after this time you can't even use those amenities.
Exactly.
And I don't think that's fair.
No,
Well, I
and
think
I should have taken the title that says outdoor amenities that create noise
Right.
and wrap that.
But any
into
noise
the
is the
narrative.
same thing. It wouldn't matter if they're playing cornhole, if they're playing music, the activity is an activity.
I think that generally you're correct. I think what this does is, and we alluded to this a little bit the last time in terms of hotels. If you think of an STR, it's just like a hotel,
Mhm.
right?
Sure.
And hotels do have, you can't go out and use a pool at 11 o'clock at night. Some areas will say that you can't create excessive noise at X. So it's similar to that vein, and it's just another way to look at it that perhaps is a little bit more specific than just a general noise standard. But yes, I agree with the comments that have been made.
Okay, we're good. Okay, terrific. Parking, this is, I
Yes. So parking.
don't know how we're going to regulate this, or should we?
So on parking, there are no current, our current provisions do not have any current parking limits or restrictions. And, when I went back and listened to all the comments and kind of thought about this a little bit more, also, I'll tell you my little survey of adjacent cities as well, is what we're trying to solve is balancing the short-term rentals on the large properties that have an abundance of parking, right? And not try to limit them to some amount that's like 2 or 3, which makes no sense. But also to ensure that the short-term rental has adequate parking. If it's a smaller short-term rental, or depending on the way it's configured, perhaps there's not an abundance of parking on site. And so parking, at least the way we're looking at it, parking is not only for the occupants, but also for their guests. So we're looking at this, I think, a little bit more in a funnel, in the sense that we're taking parking that you have to have sufficient parking. And this is a policy choice, sufficient parking for the occupants and for guests, because we're not fooling ourselves. We know guests are going to come over. And so one way to at least start tackling the issue is to provide a parking plan. And the parking plan will show how much on-site parking is available. And so next slide. And so I think the key point here is, how do we measure parking and what's adequate on-site parking? And so I try to look at this a little different Lee, and I remember, and I went back and listened to the back and forth with Councilmember Miller in terms of how I worded it. And I agree, it wasn't worded correctly. And so, but in looking and re-looking at that, I think there's a floor and there's a ceiling. And so the way I've structured this in the way I'm proposing it is that the maximum number of cars for that STR, for that rental, is aligned with how many cars on the site can you park. So for example, if you have a home that has 5 parking spaces, then they can use all 5 parking spaces. If you have a home that has a large property that has 20 parking spaces, they can use all 20 spaces. And maybe that doesn't make a difference when I ask the next question, because another way to look at it is, how do we measure the floor, or how do we determine what the minimum number of spaces is required for adequate parking? I don't think that both of these concepts need to be together. I think you can look at parking in either way. And this is up for discussion. And so what is adequate parking? Is it measured by 1 space per bedroom? Is it a formula based on bedrooms and occupants? And do we count on-street parking, and is there a limit? And so clearly, we need to make sure that there's, at least from what we're hearing from some of the complaints, is about parking. And so to address that, and if you want to address that, is how do we measure and how do we ensure adequate parking for the short-term rental? So we have, our neighboring cities do it a couple of ways. It looks like none of them, or at least a couple of them, will not issue or renew a short-term rental permit if they lack adequate on-site parking. The measurement in one city is that you divide the number of occupants to bedrooms. So if you have 5 bedrooms and the max occupancy is 10, then the formula that La Quinta chose is that you divide by 4. So your parking ratio is 4 to 1. And so 5 bedrooms can have 10 occupants. So you divide 10 by 4 equals 2.5. So they require 3 spaces. So in their estimation, they believe that 3 spaces would be adequate for 10 occupants. Perhaps that's, 2 cars, 5 bedrooms, maybe you're thinking 2 families, who knows? And on-site parking is the driveway, the garage, as we discussed the last time, but they allow 2 on-street parking spaces to account for their minimum number of parking spaces. And Palm Springs and Palm Springs doesn't say much about parking, other than the owner needs to set reasonable regulations with respect to vehicle parking. Palm Desert says that all parking associated with the STR needs to be on site and off the public street. Rancho Mirage also says something similar, is that that the owner needs to control and indicate in their contract what the number of reasonable parking spaces must be, although they allow parking spaces and where you can park is either on site or on the street. Although they single out, which is kind of curious to me, that they single out parking is okay on your private right of way if you live in a community, so your private streets or in a garage, and the number of vehicles for the short-term rental shall not exceed the total number of bedrooms. So they set a max, they set the ceiling at, if you have 5 bedrooms, then you could only have 5 cars, because that's really what it is. It's like, what's the maximum number of cars that can be associated with the short-term rental? And all of these, except for Palm Springs, you can deny a permit if there's not adequate on-site parking. So, it goes a little bit all over the board in terms of what's adequate parking. But I know I talked a little bit the last time, and I could pull those out of what other cities do, but I wanted to at least give you a framework of what's happening around us as well. So like Big Bear Lake, the parking requirement is 1 parking space per bedroom. And no parking is permitted in the street or in the yard. The South Lake Tahoe, the number of parking spaces equals 1 per every 4 occupants, similar to La Quinta. Santa Cruz is 1 vehicle per 1 bedroom, 2 vehicles per 2 or 3 bedrooms, and then 1 additional vehicle per each additional bedroom in excess of 3. Anaheim sets the vehicle limit to what's available on site. However, the minimum number of parking spaces is 2. So there are different ways to look at parking. And so I know I've thrown out a lot, but I just, it all depends on the balance and what you feel is, correct. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. I think it just depends on, what we're trying to address. And Jason, more of what's happening in the field with respect to parking, and maybe you can provide some insight before discussion or questions begin.
Roxanne, that was a great summary. And I don't know if I have much to add other than I would say occupants of short-term rentals occupying street parking. And it's typically what happens is 3 or 4 or 5 cars will park on the street and they'll occupy the space in front of neighboring homes. And that's where we get the majority of the complaints. The out-of-town renters come in, they park in front of owner-occupied homes, and it just sort of compounds parking issues in some neighborhoods.
And I recognize too that the parking belongs to the public. I mean, that's a seminal, property right that, even there's a US Supreme Court case on that issue. That all said, when we're looking at a regulatory activity, I do believe that if you'd like, that we can limit or prohibit that type of parking that happens on the street and require it that it be on site. Again, the enforcement issue. Well, we're requesting as part of the contract and as part of the intake, all of the vehicle license plate numbers that are attached to the property. This is no different than when you go to a hotel and you valet your car. They take down your vehicle license plate number because they want to make sure they're charging you the $25 for every car that's associated with your room. So I don't think that asking for license plate numbers is impeding on anybody's rights. And it includes your guest as well. So, certainly we would be able to tell if you have a list of license plate numbers and cars in the street, then you can kind of match them up or not. The difficulty, of course, becomes how to figure out when there's too many. When you see 8 cars, maybe there's 8 cars surrounded by this one little place, and you can associate, and they're maxed out at 4. But then it becomes more of a kind of not surveillance, but how do you figure that out? I mean, I'm sure that we could, if it was a house that had an issue that was a very constant issue, where you would want to put resources to essentially have somebody out there and monitor the situation and see who comes out of the door and who goes into the car. I mean, that's really the only way you'll tell if they've exceeded the parking standard. But again, I think it's going to be where those situations where parking is an issue. So I'm happy to answer questions. I don't know if the city manager has anything to add, but we're open for discussion and questions.
Roxanne, if I can add one thing, and this is another example where we want to, by requiring a parking plan, we want to prevent these neighborhood issues before they start. So we want property managers and owners to actively manage their property to prevent parking issues from happening before they become an enforcement problem.
Council,
I'd like to start.
please.
And I'm going to start from the position that streets and off-site parking belong to no one. It's public property. And no one property owner has the rights exclusivity to the parking spaces abutting their home. I believe that this is something that will end up being unenforceable, because even if someone were to give you, for example, the 5 license plate numbers, and there's 50 cars parked in the general vicinity, I mean, to pay somebody to sit there and to count who's coming in and out of what house is ridiculous. This is just going to get way out of control. I don't think we should have any parking requirements. All streets are public, all off-site sidewalks are public. If somebody wants to come and bring 50 cars, then they'll just keep parking around the corner until they have no more space. It's the same thing that private people do now when they have parties. They'll have 50 cars lined around the streets. So why are we going to treat the short-term rentals any different? I don't think that they have lesser rights. The property owner is the property owner. He just happens to be short-term rentaling, and he's paying a hefty fee to the city of Inyo to do so. So this is not an area that I would support regulating. I think the public has a right to use the streets, and no one should regulate that.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
I'll go. So I kind of concur with Loopy on a couple of the items, and how do you regulate like private streets? If you make it, we have no jurisdiction over an HOA to tell them they can or cannot. And, you know, like Montage is a prime example. About 150 of the 170 homes are short-term rentals. And, you know, so they're parking on the streets. I mean, we really can't tell. Sun City will take care of themselves, Heritage Palms, Indian Springs. But I don't know how we would say, okay, if you're a public and you're in the public right away, which are their streets, I agree with Lupe on, you can't park here and there. But if your HOA and private does it, we really don't have the jurisdiction to tell an HOA what they can do, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really limiting the public ones and not any of the private ones, because they would have to go through the HOA, which does have their own rules. So I don't know how you regulate it where it's fair. That's why I always say it's got to be fair. You can't, like we always said, the ones that are behind a private gate can do other things, and the noise, and it's different. And the ones in public are the ones that really get hits. Like the dog's a good example, the animal control.
Mm-hmm.
We can't go behind the gate, but we do that. So how do we make it fair? This is the same thing. It's just a different way. That's where it gets me. And I agree with Lupe. I do agree it's a problem. But I think when you start talking about, well, these people can, these people can't, you can't have an HOA license. This guy can have 10 because he doesn't have, having a plan, I don't have a problem with.
Mm-hmm.
Telling them they can't, or trying to figure out who's these cars, because what happens if we do go there and all of a sudden they aren't their cars, it's the people next door. Are we harassing them if they haven't done anything? Are we telling them what they do? I mean, really, do we have jurisdiction to go look at stuff? I mean, we can barely do what we're doing, let alone add extra stuff, unless we're going to start paying for it some way. I just want to make sure that we're not just picking on a certain group because of that. Because if you look down, you go down Deglet North, all there is cars up and down the street.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you regulate that? So it's just, I think it's very difficult for that. I don't like laws, like I said, that we cannot enforce. I understand we have to have some teeth, and I do agree with the parking plan, because I think they should. What do you really have, so we can kind of jurisdiction? But even when people come to my house to do stuff, they don't park in my driveway. I mean, you just don't. I mean, even though we're a gated community, you just don't. You don't, first thing you don't think is, oh, I'm going to park in somebody's driveway. You don't, you park on the street.
Yeah.
Natural instinct. If you're in a group and that you do, but I'm just saying, if you have people come, it's very difficult to think somebody's going to park in the driveway. So it's tough to enforce, but I do agree with the parking plan.
Any other comments?
Yeah,
Oscar?
I agree with the parking plan as well, because, and like Jason said, it's more on the side of prevention than enforcement, right? If we have listings that say you can only have this many vehicles here and you have to register them, then I think that's going to be a lot more likely that people will follow those rules than if we have no guidance on that issue, right? And if we're talking about residential areas, right, we need to have that kind of enforcement, because like you're saying, if somebody comes to your house, they don't want to park in your driveway, right? Well, what if your whole street's taken up?
Yeah.
Then where are they going to go, right?
Sure.
And so it creates this inconvenience. I mean, it already happens, like you're saying, when people have parties, this and that, but that's not frequent, right? And we're talking about full-time short-term rentals with no guidance on parking. Then I think it can get out of control really quickly, and we need to provide that protection for the residential owners there that have to deal with that on a daily basis or weekly basis. And I do like I think from the ones that you mentioned, I like the La Quinta one, where you divide the number of occupants by 4, or if we had, whatever on-site parking is available, if you have, a 2-car driveway, then it'd be 2 cars, maybe plus 1 on the street, something like that.
Councilmember Furman. I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem.
All right. I want to err on the side of the owner having to provide adequate parking on the property. It goes without saying that the streets are public parking. I live in a gated. Our HOA is very strict with parking. You have to register. I've gotten tickets from my HOA and I lived there for forgetting to move my car. But at the same time, it's easily accessible to go online and register vehicles with the HOA. And a lot of these properties are in gated communities. So the HOA, we don't have jurisdiction over that. Nonetheless, most of the HOAs that I know of do a great job of enforcement. And a lot of these STRs are used for parties, right? So you're going to have those cars parked in the driveway. So I err more on side of having the owner just provide adequate parking, driveway parking for the occupants. And after that point, if the street parking's open, it's public parking.
By and large, I agree with that. I mean, I'm thinking of the streets that are not HOA, because generally HOA is regulated. And if they don't regulate it, then at the risk of sounding harsh, shame on them. I mean, they need to. That's the job of an HOA. I'm thinking of the other, streets that are just regular neighborhoods. And you're right, they're public streets. Having a parking plan, I think, is a good idea. If it's a short-term rental, people are going to park in the driveway. I agree with what you said, but if it's a short-term rental, they're going to park in the driveway anyways, because that's part of the plan. And that's something we need to help the owners of these properties say, okay, your driveway needs to be accessible. You can't tape it off, and so on and so forth. And, I feel for the neighbors, but, if I have that problem, I'm going to go to Home Depot and buy an orange cone and put it in front of my house to make sure nobody parks there. So we really can't regulate what goes on in the street. We can help manage it by having some kind of plan. Again, we're speaking to the very small percentage and having something that allows our code enforcement to go out there and deal with the situation. If they're parking on front lawns and, every single weekend and during the week, it's constantly jammed. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to achieve with this whole ordinance, not just the parking, is that small percentage.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, so the next topic, there wasn't a lot of discussion when I went back to look, but wanted to at least confirm kind of where we're headed with occupancy, which is at the start, 2 per bedroom plus 4 additional. So, that's our baseline. And then we add a 2 for each bedroom, and I'll show you the chart. You can ignore about the off-street parking. This is the slide from the last study session. So let me just stop there so you can look at the proposed occupancy. So for example, we cap out at 8. So for a studio, if there's such a thing here in the Valley, it's 4. And then you add 2 for every bedroom. So, for 3 bedrooms, the occupancy is 10, and this is overnight occupancy, not a daytime occupancy. I know there was a lot of discussion the first study session with respect to that. And then, I can, I read you off, I think the last time in terms of occupancy. For example, Palm Springs caps out at 5. So their occupancy is a daytime and an overnight. So for the overnight, a studio is 2. And then for a 3-bedroom, let's just stick with the 3-bedroom number, their occupancy is at 6, where ours would be at 10. Rancho Mirage, their occupancy is also at 6. La Quinta for 3 bedrooms, their occupancy is 6 to 8. And then Cathedral City, their occupancy is 6. So that kind of gives you a feel of where everybody else is at. And, The way that we currently do occupancy, and I'll give you that number right now. I should have put a slide on it. The way that we currently do occupancies, we have a set number. And that set number is in our code. But if somebody has a larger bedroom, if somebody has a larger house with more bedrooms, then they can request that building and safety then go and, as part of their inspection, look to see how many, like there's let's say there's an office but has a pullout, and that's not considered a bedroom because it doesn't have a closet. And so you can have 2 more persons in there. And maybe I'll let Rob speak to this because I know he's had a lot of experience with that, and I'll get the exact number.
Thank you, Roxanne. Rob Rockwell, Assistant City Manager and Finance Director. So we allow for a variance. We asked oftentimes when they'll submit an application for larger than the ordinance allows, which is currently 2 per bedroom plus 2, they have to provide some evidence. They'll give us a floor plan. They'll give us pictures that they have bunk beds in a room or something that validates, or they'll explain that they have a couch, a pull-out couch, maybe in a den area. And so we take that into consideration, and we usually give them, 2 more bodies per bed, for example, or 1 more per a bunk bed or something like that. And that's the logic we're using now when we allow these variances.
And so what we were trying to do with this chart and increasing it, and we internally, we had a big staff sit down to kind of hash all of this out. And I think part of it is to dispense with the discretion that is happening now in terms of, because we know if you're set up for a short-term rental, that living room is a pull-out couch. A den is a pull-out couch, an office, there's a bunk room with 4 beds where there usually may be just a queen. So we were trying to eliminate the work and the discretion that we're doing now and just give you an extra bump if that's happening. And so I don't suspect that, for example, your nicer houses that want to capture, more bigger rents, because of the amenities that they have, or, maybe their furniture is a little bit more fancy. They're not going to stick 4 bunks beds from Costco. It just kind of goes against the grain of what their house is being marketed at and the cost. But the other homes that already have that, it's not, I just don't foresee, and maybe I'm wrong, just foresee that everybody's going to rush out and go to Costco and buy, bunk beds. But anyway, so that's the logic of it. And so, we're happy to answer any questions. And then I could talk about what happens at a higher number. So maybe I'll stop there.
And that sounds plausible to me. Any other comments? Good, we're good. Councilmember Amit?
Thank you. There's no mention of the variance application in the section. So how would people know?
Correct. And the new ordinance, we're not proposing a variance. So we're looking at eliminating that, and instead we are increasing the base occupancy, really based on the discussions that we've had and what staff has looked at for when people come in and want additional occupancy numbers.
Okay.
Okay, all right, we're good.
So then let's talk about, one of the topics last time was gatherings, wanting not to prohibit gatherings, recognizing that, there are some homes in the city that are very large estates that are being utilized not only as a short-term rental, but also providing a venue for a wedding, and or a large event. Is it the Bougainvillea estate, I think? And maybe I got it wrong, but anyway. And so how do we address that? And how do we address uses during the concert with respect to having gatherings there? So talked a lot about this, and Rancho Mirage, for example, and even Palm Springs looks at it as 5 bedrooms or more. It's considered an estate, and then you have to have a special event permit. Rancho Mirage does it by a number of bodies, day or night. And really, it's going to be day that goes into the evening, I suppose, at 25. And so at that point in time, to have in those large gatherings for a special event or for your Thanksgiving dinner, for your Christmas, whatever, then you have to get what we're calling right now is a special event permit. I don't envision that that's going to be something for like the family Thanksgiving or the family Christmas, that it's going to be more than just something that you go online and fill it out and, you're truthful and it is what it is. However, for a larger estate that is going to have, a corporate, event or some type of huge party, during the festivals, then it's going to be a little bit more complicated, or I shouldn't say complicated. We want more information. How's the parking going to work? How, are you going to have shuttles? Is there going to be valet? I mean, because at that point, as all of you know, we don't have the resources. Our resources are maxed during the festivals. And so we want to do a lot of this upfront so that things can run more smoothly and that we know about where these events are happening. That's kind of, here's the prohibited activities. So that's, in line with what are your thoughts with respect to that and addressing the larger party situation. I do think, and I've had conversations with community development, if we do have very large homes that are used for weddings like they have in Palm Springs, then we should really be addressing that from a land use perspective, that they come in for a conditional use permit. So that way, if it's a home where there's, on acres of land and there's no impact, there's no secondary impact to anybody, then the best way to address that is through a CUP and to zone it, to allow it depending on, the size of the property. And that way, you can address any impacts and you can ensure that there's a parking plan, et cetera, et cetera. But here we're really trying to look at this more of, balancing the family gatherings with the parties. And by no means is this are we saying that we're never going to have a party that's never got a permit, because we know that's not true. But we're hopeful that we can try to work with some of the, vendors that come months in advance before Coachella to ask about that. So I'll stop talking and open it up for discussion.
Absolutely. I just want to make one thought, though, one comment. I think we all sort of were focused on the biggest challenges during concert season. That's when we have the largest number of people. I'm curious, Rob, because I think, and I see, and I hear short-term rentals year round, absolutely year round, whether it's pool for a day, because that's the latest thing to do. But I have friends I have that have next door neighbors that every single weekend, which is okay with them. I mean, but I'm just saying, I think I'm looking at this just more on a year round to make it user friendly, to make it neighborhood friendly, because short-term rentals are something that I believe we have all the time, a large percentage of all the time.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to make comment, it was a bit surprising how much short-term rental we had through the pandemic. We thought that when the concerts weren't occurring, that maybe that short-term rental activity would decline. That certainly wasn't the case. And so it's very consistent, even through the winter holidays, maybe a little bit dip in the summertime, but not much. The one thing I will point out, though, is that because we're receiving such a large portion of our TOT through Airbnb, we get that revenue when the rooms are booked, not necessarily when they're used. So that skews the statistics a little bit. So it might be more fair to say that we have a constant number of reservations on a regular basis occurring every month. When those properties are being used, we don't exactly know for sure. But I would generally agree with you that we're not seeing these large spikes that just happen in April because of the concert. We're seeing more year-round activity. And certainly some of that is being driven by the fact that other cities, local cities, are no longer embracing short-term rentals. And they're coming here because they're looking for places to get away, and we're still embracing that activity.
Which is why I was trying to sort of move this along, because I know that sort of season is starting and people come out here. Wedding season, right, is coming up, especially now since COVID. And people are coming out to enjoy the weather, have a good time. It's winter. So I know that that's coming down the pike, and I thought we might try to manage this. Any other comments? specific to the over 25 persons need a special permit for any large event.
I have comments.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Libby.
Can someone put the PowerPoint back up?
Of course. Yeah. I need help in the back to. It is.
So- Okay, now it is. This is a bit confusing for me, especially since out here in my area, we have very large homes and very large estates that are being used for weddings, large parties, fundraisers. I understand the special event permit. I think that's what they do right now. But what are you trying to say here with respect to those? Because I don't want to impede their ability to continue to have their properties used as venues.
Of course, and I can provide some clarification. I think there's definitely a difference between a home that is being utilized for corporate events or weddings and whatnot, and not for a short-term rental. Those homes are not getting a short-term rental permit, and the way they're renting their house for events as an event venue. And I think from that perspective, we need to address that from a land use perspective. Short-term, there are some permittees of short-term rental permits that believe that because they got a permit, they can have a party or they can rent it out for a large gathering. And that's the difference, is where there, maybe there are some people spending the night there if it's a more of a personal type thing versus a corporate event, or maybe a corporate type of event is happening and it's just happening at a short-term rental and you have some people staying there. But it's as if it's a license, it's as if that permit is a license to have a party. And so what we're trying to regulate here, just from the short-term rental perspective, is to say to the short-term rental permittees, you may have a short-term rental, but that only gives you the right to have X number of people to spend the night, enjoy the property, but it doesn't give you the right to have a large party. It doesn't give you the right to have more than 25 people at any time at that house. And if you desire to have more than 25 people at that house, then you need to come in for additional permit. Not the owner, but the owner would have to sign off on it. It would be the owner and the occupant that would come in for this permit. And again, if it's Thanksgiving, if it's Christmas Day, that's hopefully something that's manageable. But if it's a corporate event or a, K-Rock or something at a huge estate that has a short-term rental permit and they didn't get any other permit, that short-term rental permit doesn't give them a license to have a huge party.
No,
So-
they would need the special event permit on top of the short-term rental permit.
Correct.
And I'm hoping that the special event permit is helping us pay for the services that we need to keep enforcement. I do not want to move in a direction where we're going to require land use, conditional use permits.
Right.
I think that'll open a Pandora's box for us to have less ability to regulate and less ability to really control the growth of this industry. I would rather it be on a case-by-case basis as a special event permit, and that we collect our due fees, not only to pay for the services, but, we receive TOT when they pull the short-term rental. What are we receiving when they pull the special event permit? We don't have any revenue source other than the cost recovery, which
That's
seems
correct.
like we're missing out on something. So let's see if we can't figure out how to capture, well, we have the attendance fee that we have adopted. Because honestly, I have a property here right by my home, 300 people guests for weddings on weekends, and they don't charge a fee, but what is the city receiving to offset that is the question.
Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the special use permit if it gets to a certain size, as long as it's reasonable and we treat everybody the same, where it's a simple process where they go in and they come back in and they change things, and this guy does it different, this guy does it. That's one of the problems that we have with some of the other ones, is we make certain individuals jump through hoops and others. And there needs to be a set thing where it can be done quickly and not over a 2-month period, because we've had that for other places where people have really come and they feel 2 months or 2.5 months is a proper amount of time for any city that's equipped like the city of festivals to have events, knowing that they're going to be a big events there. They come in 2 months and, oh, well, if you would have came in a month ago, we would be able to get you the permit. They're just going to have it anyways. We want to be business friendly. At the same time, we want to be able to coordinate it. If it's not up to 25 people, I don't know why you can't have why can't you have a wedding if it's a short-term rental and you have 20 people? If you're allowed 20 people, you're allowed 20 people. You're telling me you can't have it unless it's a gathering? I mean, 20 people, would it matter if it's a wedding or if it's anything else? If it's over 25, then maybe they should. But to say that they can't have like with, anybody else can't have a donation event or something, a small gathering of people that are going to put money into an activity or a cause. I understand you're trying to have a carrot and a stick and trying to do it, but I mean, they own it. I agree with it. It shouldn't be commercial use, but once they get to 25, they have to have the special permit, but there should be a process where it comes quickly. Because even on ours, we have garage permits for garage sales, but we don't have any code enforcement on Saturdays and Sundays to stop them. So if they have a permit or not, there isn't anything you can do about it. So if you ask them to come in and get a permit, but unless they get caught or somebody does anything, there's no way to enforce what we have because we don't have anybody work Saturday and Sunday.
Well, that's going to change, right? Because this
Yes.
is all for naught. Otherwise, yeah. Okay.
Right.
Any other
But-
comments?
I agree with 25 persons needing a special permit. Also from a response, for our public safety folks, if they need to respond to a certain situation, it gives them an idea already with the application. Hey, this event has 100 people.
Yeah.
We have a fire. At least we know there's some folks there, and the no commercial activities, it's kind of hard, but I see where we're going with the no fee, no donation events, because say we do have a large festival. And before I even go there, I just want to add, I'm planning on having a festival every month. And that's where I want to get to. So that's why this thing needs to be user-friendly and streamlined. And, no fee. And the reason why I say that is we do have a lot of celebrities that come in the Valley for some of our festivals. And if they're having a house at the Montage and they're having a pool party and they're going to sell tickets for $400 or $500, that shouldn't be allowed.
Should or should not be allowed?
Shouldn't.
Okay.
No, shouldn't be allowed. And so I do agree with that. But there's also folks that come in to our Valley corporate events. I actually attended one, a Herbalife event. It was a daytime event. There was more than 25 people there, but it was actually put on real well. It was, one of our larger properties. So I see how these things do work. And I think we can make this work, but anything over 25, I do agree with having a permit. But Councilmember Miller alluded to weddings. Some weddings have, 15, 20 people. So the way this looks, it looks like no weddings. So I think it should just be
25.
an event over 25, regardless if it's a wedding, if it's a pool party, or if it's children. So
And certainly during the pandemic, everybody had very small weddings.
Yeah.
So-
Very small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much
Wedding
so.
at all.
Yeah. Oscar?
No, the only thing is on a different topic that I wanted to bring up again is if we're gonna put any limits on any of the full-time rentals, any new full-time rentals. Because I think we should put a limit on that because we're getting, the main complaints that I get is that the neighborhoods are changing it's just changing the atmosphere, right?
And I
It's getting
totally get
too
to that.
commercial.
Can we wrap this up?
Yeah,
And
go
then,
ahead.
and then the floor will be yours?
Okay, yeah, just wondering
Okay.
because we're almost out of time here.
Yeah, well, we'll extend so that you get your chance. I kind of agree with everybody. Maybe over 25 people where we need to get that permit, because we want to make sure we know what's going on. We want to make sure it doesn't get out of control. If it's a wedding, if it's Herbalife, if it's Mary Kay, whatever. I mean, gosh, thank you for coming to our city and because some of those people are going to grab food, we hope, on their way out or something like that. So yes, I think Juaritos, I look at, she's getting some corporate clients over at Mexicali that I can't even fathom. It's massive. Yes. Yeah. So I would regulate it, not totally, manage it. I think the key to me is in the number of persons, not not what, not no commercial activities. That's my
Okay.
2 cents.
We'll make some changes to that. And I can't, this doesn't have a battery that works. So I'm
That's
just
fine.
gonna, you have the PowerPoint. So some of the things that have come up, I just wanted to point that out, like you can't rent a pool, you know, as a short-term rental. You can't rent the RV that happens to be there or the tree house. You know, you can't pitch tents and call that a short-term rental, even though you're renting the property. You can't combine different, if you own 3 lots and you can't combine that, so that becomes a huge compound. You know, if you're a renter in an apartment, you can't use that as a short-term rental. I think we're going to internally flesh out a little bit more on the casitas, and we'll bring that back to you. Just quickly, I wanted to ask in terms of the age of the renter, I had placed 25, Councilmember Mead had said 21. If, you know, if 21 is, it's up to you guys. So if 21 sounds reasonable to you, it's of legal age, or if you wanted to do it higher. I don't know if
What do you
anybody
guys
has
think?
any strong feelings with respect to that.
I'm good with 21 because it's really up to the property owner that wants to rent it. If he wants to rent it to somebody that's of 21 of age, who's legally able to do things, I'm good with that. I think to put an age on it, especially for Coachella Fest and some of the other music festivals where there are younger groups coming in, that's up to the homeowner if he wants or she wants to be able to provide that under a certain age. But yeah, 21 should be the legal age, especially for drinking and that. There, you know, somebody there is responsible there that's signed off. And so if there's alcohol there and there's not old enough people, falls on them.
That's right. Exactly. I agree. Okay.
And then just quickly before we get on that question, the other one was, can a corporation rent a short-term rental? You know, and so I know that I think it's during the festivals, you might have some corporations that will rent the homes for their employees or whatnot. Are you okay with that? I have a prohibition in here now.
Is there any way we could limit how many? I mean,
Well, because I think that the issue that we've been seeing is where they start stacking, right? And they'll say it's a 31-day rental.
I don't know if we have that issue. That gets you out of the TOT.
Exactly.
And so I don't know, Jason, if or Rob, that you've seen that. I think it's more so that you have a corporate entity that rents it on behalf of somebody else, and it's really an individual that is inside of it.
So what do you do about Golden Voice who rents for properties or people that work for them that are
Well,
working
that's-
at the festivals where they provide housing? Do you say
That's
they
what
can't do it?
that's why I'm
That's
asking.
why I don't think you can. They're responsible. It has to be a certain age. Somebody has to be responsible for it like everyone else. And if there's a problem, it goes to them. You might have your own company and you might want to do it through your company. So you're not paying for it
That's fine.
personally. You know, that's a corporation doing it.
Okay.
I agree.
And then those were my issues unless Councilmember Mead, I think I hit all of them throughout the discussion. I went back and listened. Okay, great. She's nodding yes. And then in terms of what Councilmember Ortiz is talking about, that is the concept where you limit a short-term renter, an owner of a short-term rental, you limit the number of days they can rent out their property as a short-term rental. We don't have that prohibition. This ordinance doesn't provide for that. And so that's, I think if I stated it correctly, I think that's what you're looking at.
I think if we grandfather in the ones that are already permitted, then we keep our tax revenue that we're currently getting. But then if we also limit any new ones to 30 days, then that'll allow, you know, for people to still be able to buy homes, keep our residential areas residential, and, you know, reduce some of those concerns from our residents.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's infringing on private property rights. I wouldn't be in favor of supporting that.
Okay.
I concur.
What are you thinking? 30 days, a year?
I know Palm Springs has 32 days, and that's how they're going about it. 32 days a year, so then it makes it feasible, you know, for families who want to rent it out for the festivals. They can rent it out for a couple of weekends, you know, that's still 15 weekends throughout the year that you can rent it out. But then also, you know, it won't make it feasible for corporations who want to rent it out year round in our residential neighborhoods.
I hear what you're saying. I guess from my point of view, I'm not quite there yet. I would like to try to see if we can manage the bad actors with this ordinance before I go there. If we can't, then I think we can bring that back up. But let's try to manage the short-term rentals. I would hate to have someone that says you can only rent your house essentially 1 weekend a year. 1 weekend a month, pretty much, or for the 3 weekends of Coachella Festival, and that's it. I think that's a little more than I would be comfortable with at this point in time. That's kind of just my 2 cents.
So then what do we say to our lower income residents who are trying to find homes in the city when there's such a low stock at this moment and they're getting bought out by corporations who are just going to rent them out?
But that's a different topic. We're not talking about that right now. And you need to look on MLS to see what properties are available. There's plenty of properties available. So that's not related to what we're talking about.
I mean, we
They're
can't.
doing it in other cities. I mean, we have the example
Well,
and it's working.
I think we're off topic and you need to wrap this up.
I don't know. I would have to do some more research on it myself. I know this conversation is not over today, but at the same time, we have to look at it like this. So some of these properties, they're not affordable. You know, unfortunately, some of these properties are not affordable for some folks to move in. I think it's another topic when it comes to housing, where we need to provide more housing and do it better on our end. You know, so
I agree. And different types of housing.
Yeah.
Modular homes, mobile homes, other things to get starter homes, apartments, and that to get people going. Condominiums we don't have, townhouses, start to get them there so they can move their way up as they're going through. So we need to do a better job of providing all types of housing that the market bears.
Which we're working on our housing element. So
yeah.
And I think
because I think it's we need a balance. To your point, we need a balance. Go, City Manager.
Well, I think what you said, Mayor, I think is wise. Once the ordinance is formally presented and adopted, we have additional enforcement staff and these regulations when things go bad. To give it a year or two to see how it's going is, I think, prudent. To see if then other tweaks, whether it be this one or others, should come to bear. We just need to get it adopted in place and exercise it for a while, knowing that it may not be perfect and further revisions would come down the road.
I agree.
I agree. But what I want to say to Councilmember Ortiz is keep the thought alive in terms of our housing element, in terms of apartments, in terms of condos, in terms of everything else that we're working on. I hear what you're saying, but I have a hard time stopping that.
I think it's more urgent for me, you know, when we talk to the real estate agents to see how much of our housing stock is being sold off and not benefiting our residents who need housing at this point. And that's why it's such an urgent issue for me.
Understood. Okay.
In terms of next steps, I think honestly, unless the city manager disagrees, I think we're at a point where I can make the tweaks based on today's conversation and finalize it. And just bring it back at a regular meeting. I know we're going to talk to the Expedia folks and the Airbnb folks and look at their changes and comments and maybe work some of those in. The initial one that I got, it doesn't seem anything detrimental. So if that's okay, then I think we would be ready to bring it back at a formal meeting. And then, or if you want another study session, it's up to you.
I think I would be ready to bring it back at another meeting. I mean, we can discuss this at some point. We put a stake in the ground. We try to make it work and we move forward and tweak it if something needs to be tweaked. Is everybody else okay with that?
I'm good.
And even if it's at a formal meeting, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be introduced that night. But at least then that way you have a different type of audience in the evening to also participate. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to closed session. It is 10 minutes after 4. This is closed session of the Indio City Council. I'm calling the closed session meeting to order, and may I have roll call, please?
For the record, all council members are present.
Terrific. Public comment. This is a time set aside for public comment. If anyone wishes to speak, please fill out a form, call in, or send in an email.
I have no comments, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, let's adjourn to closed session to consider A, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, government code section 54956.9 D2, number of potential cases 2, and B, conference. Do I need to go through all this? I don't need to go through this.
We can go into closed session for the items that are listed on the closed session agenda, which is posted online.
Where she makes the big
outside.
butts. Thank you.